Salt of the Earth Farm Stories is proudly brought to you by Grig Media. Step into the world of farmers from diverse backgrounds across Australia. Through intimate interviews, host Darren Grigg delves into farming practices, traditions, and the challenges farmers face in nurturing the land.
We're at Coranderrk Station with Wurundjeri Woi-Wurrung elder Uncle Dave Wandin. We discuss the balance between agriculture and ecology. He shares insights about the bush tucker cultivated on their farm, traditional learning, saving Indigenous plant species, pest management, and the importance of cultural burning.
A very popular man, David. I feel a bit privileged to be talking to you today, so thanks for joining me.
Thanks very much, Daz. You're right about popularity, and I think it's not deserved. I'm quite humbled by the following that I have in teaching people how to care for country.
Absolutely. And you're currently on a farm north of Melbourne?
Yeah, manage a farm on what remains of the Coranderrk Mission Station, which is where my ancestors were pushed onto with the colonisation of Victoria, actually. And that's a real privilege. That's my dream job.
I love hearing that. Can we go back a few years? Where were you born?
I was born in Hillsville, where Coranderrk Station is situated. Born there in 1961 at the Hillsville Hospital, which is still standing today. Left there when I was 6, unfortunately. But when my dad retired, and we had been given some of this land back of the former Coranderrk Station, and a house was set aside for my dad as an elder. And my dad didn't drive, and he said, I need to get my furniture up there. And I said, no worries, Dad, I've got you covered. And moved him up there. And it was at that moment that Dad actually started to teach me my culture. Prior to that, I was basically brought up to not deny my Aboriginality, but don't refer to it. It's easier to get along, live like the white man. But I think Dad realised that that was wrong and proceeded to teach me. And his words were to me, son, learn all the culture you can, because one day Australia's going to be asking us, the Aboriginal people, how did you survive so long? And I laughed at him because I thought, why would anybody want to know that from me? But it became true after he passed away that I am being approached by mainstream Australians. How did your people live? Because we need to learn. If climate change happens as they're predicting, they're going to be looking for us. How do we find the food, your native foods, not just your kangaroo and your emu, but yeah, how can we survive in this landscape? No one can envisage not having a Coles or a Chemist Warehouse or a Bunnings, but it is all out there for us, for the Aboriginal people.
You're doing a great job at sharing your knowledge and passing that on. And talking about generations, I was lucky enough to have a meal with you last night, and I believe you are quite responsible for quite a few generations. Did you say you've got a great-grandchild?
Yep. I have 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. Yeah.
Still a young-looking Uncle David for a great-grandfather.
Yeah, but I am 63.
Well done.
Yeah, we've contributed our part to the 2.3 per family to the Australian population statistics.
Now tell me about your environment growing up and your respect for country.
The environment that I grew up in was with northern suburbs and not much connection to country from an Aboriginal perspective. But as a child, I've always been very, very inquisitive, particularly drawn to waterways. And I spent most of I call Merry Creek, which runs through, starting from Epping, going through Layla, Thomastown, Reservoir, Preston, Coburg, and all the way into the city. That was my playground. And I was forever getting into trouble getting into that place. And I thought nothing of it because it was a very degraded creek. It's rated number 3 on waterway restoration projects from around the world.
Wow.
It's an amazing change that's happened through dedicated volunteers. And I am an advisor and a consultant to the Merry Creek Management Committee too. make sure that waterway stays preserved, but not only preserved, but also enhanced for future generations.
You've got an amazing connection to country. How has that shaped your identity today?
It is my identity. My country is my identity. I realised that after my father passed away that I had a responsibility not to look after my family and carry on his stories, but to take over the role that he had as an elder to demonstrate how to care for country. And without country to demonstrate on, then I don't have an identity.
So you've learnt from your dad, but you've also had other elders in your life that you've learnt from?
I have learned from many other Aboriginal leaders and mentors and elders. When I started to explore what we call caring for country and understanding country within my own organisation, my own mob, which is the Wurundjeri, a lot of that knowledge was lost or not remembered anymore. And so I did have to seek other avenues of research, and I did like everyone does today and went on Google. And there's a lot of information there, but it doesn't really tell you a lot. So I've had the opportunity over the last 10 years to do a lot of work up and down the east coast of Australia with various other mobs. I've questioned them all, and basically I've rebuilt the database of land management on Wurundjeri country through their willingness to share with me. But I've also inadvertently filled in some of the missing gaps in their knowledge as well. And that's been a privilege to see this groundswell of pride that I see in Aboriginal people take today, of being able to care for country and know that it is the right way. There are many ways to care for country, but there's only one right way, and that's by listening to what country tells you.
So you've learned a lot from your elders, but now you're an elder. How does that feel? And I know you said yesterday you still are not going to stop learning.
That's right. As an elder, you do not ever stop learning because you are always get questions asked. And I know a lot of people are afraid of getting questioned because they may not know the answers, but I welcome it because it gives me purpose to go home that night and learn more. And also, my dad told me when I was about 15 and I was going out into the workforce, he said, if you want to get ahead in life, don't become an expert and stick at that one thing, because otherwise you get known as a smart ass. He's told me, never go to bed until you learn something new. And I still apply that every night, no matter what I've done during the day. Before I go to sleep, I take a few moments to think, so what did I learn today? It's not about how much I earned. It's not about how much I did or didn't do, as a production type thing. It's what did I learn? And if I haven't learned anything, if I go through the day and say, oh, I didn't learn bugger all, then I'll go to my library, and I've got one room that's just full of books, and I will pick up a book, and I actually can't sleep until I feel comfortable that I've learnt something new.
We can all gain from that.
Yeah.
Well, that brings me to my next question, actually. Tell me about some of the occupations you've had. You've had a very busy life so far.
Yeah, my occupations. Aside from IT stuff, computers, and I'll say modern cars as well. I don't know if we've got enough time. I'll give you... My resume reads like an Excel spreadsheet when they're trying to avoid getting sued for an oil spill. When I was at primary school, I had a job as a paper boy, which everybody did in those days, but at the same time, once I finished my paper round, I would then go and work in a bakery before I went to school. When I left school, I got a job working part-time in a butcher shop, at the same time undertaking my apprenticeship as a fitter and turner. And just to fill in the gaps of a night time, I then began to do roadieing for bands, which eventually moved on to being roadieing, sound and lighting engineer. I never did finish my apprenticeship, and I didn't become a qualified butcher. After that, I worked through various companies, and this was in the 70s, where there was no shortage of work. And basically, if you didn't like the factory you're working in on the day, you just walked out and knocked on the factory next door, and there was no interview process. You just say you're looking for a job, and they say, yep, when can you start? And went in. So I did a whole lot of variety of things, mainly based around metalworking, whether it be cutting, grinding, shaping, welding, doing all of that kind of work. So I was never out of a job there. I was still continuing the roading. My next set of jobs was, well, there actually was the one job that ended up being multi-skilled, working in a timber factory, making plywood. Started off as a floor sweeper, got promoted to machine operator, then leading hand, then supervisor, then got moved into maintenance. And in that maintenance role, I've done electrical, plumbing, concreting, locksmithing, glazing, general building, landscaping. They had quite extensive grounds. And I love to learn. My dad didn't tell me how to learn. I love to learn things when I see things. I want to know how they work. I love pulling things apart. I used to rebuild second-hand TVs and radios and cassette players back in the day.
You mentioned last night you had a run-in with electricity at one point.
Oh yes, don't worry. No lock health and safety back in the 70s, particularly working as a roadie and you're setting up all your equipment and the stage lights. Yeah, well, you turn the switches on, they don't work. And the way we were taught to check was put your finger up in the light socket and got zapped a few times. First time was scary. Second time was, oh yeah. Then after that, it was like part of the job. Yeah, been electrocuted quite a few times.
And a few land management roles?
Well, actually, yes, I always loved working in the garden. Dad was a very keen vegetable gardener, and Dad moved quite a lot before we moved back to Hillsville. So he might stay in a house for 2 years or so. And every time he moved to a new house, called me and my brother, and we'd dig a few holes to see what the soil was like and then build a garden bed. And it was always my job to mow the lawn, and I actually loved doing that. So yeah, I've always had that connection to the land of wanting to get my hands in the dirt. But I didn't start natural resource management or caring for country until I'd got back to Hillsville, where we had 90 acres of bush, and I was down there all the time. And I guess, yeah, that's where my curiosity. So that wasn't until 1996 that I started to look about natural resource management.
Can you tell me some of the NRM positions you've held?
Oh, again, yeah. So to do NRM work, you don't need a license to operate a lawnmower, but if you want to do real NRM work, you need to be innovative and you need to be a leader. So how I got officially into NRM work, the property where I live in Hillsville has bushland attached to it, and I looked at the blackberry and it was annoying me. So I undertook a role to try and remove the blackberry. My work with Wurundjeri, the office or the business of the Aboriginal organisation, they heard about what I was doing for not getting paid, and there was money available at the time from the federal government called Caring for Country. And Wurundjeri hadn't actually spent that money, but they heard what I was doing voluntarily, so they asked me if I wanted to start an Aboriginal bush crew. Had no idea what was entailed in running a business, if you like, a new business enterprise. So two of us, me and two others, another elder and another young boy, we started to then look to acquire the skills to upscale what we were doing on land that we owned as Aboriginal people. And that involved blackberry work, a lot of weed control. So I found out you actually have to have skills to do that, not just the ability to operate a chainsaw or a brush cutter. So first off, I had to go and get my chemical users permit, known as the ACUP. Did have to requalify on my chainsaw ticket. Had to, of course, make sure I got a license. Various things as you move and gain skills that you realise you need this piece of equipment, that piece of equipment. You've got to always be upskilling. But I found most of it pretty easy. Again, I'm very inquisitive, and I've got I don't know what's the word here. I can pick up things quite easily. You only got to show me something once usually, and I'm able to undertake those tasks. At the same time, I then became mentors for other people that came into the bush crew as the demand grew for Aboriginal people working on country.
So the name of the farm you're on today?
The name of the farm is, we still call it Coranderrk Station, the former Coranderrk Mission Station. So the farm consists of 200 acres of river frontage on the Yarra River, which we now call the Woi-Wurrung. It's correct Aboriginal name. And it's run by Wandin Estate Aboriginal Corporation.
Awesome. And what are you running there, Uncle David?
So yeah, when I refer to Coranderrk Station as, well, we call it the farm. So when we got the land back in 1998, 200 acres of an original 4,850, it came with cattle on it. And so we continued with the cattle. So we don't actually run the cattle. We just thought, yeah, it's a lot of land, 200 acres, and the cattle do a good job of reducing the fire risk and keeping the grass down. So we adjust it. We don't take the actual the risk sharing of cattle farming because none of us are cattle farmers. So the cows come in and fattened up, and the adjuster takes the risk of whatever the market volatility might be when the cattle are ready for sale. That's a good thing. That's a bit of land, but it's not actually using it culturally. So we started to look at what it meant to have that land given back to us as people. And me starting to do land management is looking at how I can use that as a demonstration of how agriculture can work alongside what we call conservation. I call it actually balancing agriculture with ecology. So the agriculture is the main income of the organisation. So from a modern farmer's perspective, well, I can't have conservation because I need every spare bit of ground that I've got to grow grass for my cattle. But that's not ecologically or environmentally responsible. So I wanted to set up a demonstration where you can have successful cattle, healthy cattle, and still have healthy country and healthy waterways. So we reduced our cattle and put roughly 20% of the land aside for conservation, and commenced to start doing then re-veg works after doing a lot of weed control. And we've shown that we've actually haven't decreased the number of head we have on the property by working with our adjuster. So he had to understand our values, because yes, he did want to put more cattle on and take up more of the usable land. But we identified land that was not really suitable for cattle anyway, and we closed them off and turned them into conservation areas.
And was that land closer to the creek?
Yeah, so the land is fronted on two sides by Coranderrk Creek, which feeds into the Yarra River, or the Woi-Wurrung River, as we now know. So it's got about 3 kilometres, I think, of stream frontage.
And why did you keep the cattle away from the creek?
Well, I don't think that is very productive to the health of our waterways. So we basically created a buffer from the waterways of a minimum of 50 metres. But in some cases, depending on what pasture grass wasn't growing there, we were able to extend that out. I think at its widest, it's probably 110 metres away from the Yarra River in particular. And on average along there, about 80 metres away from the Yarra River.
So the cattle are now drinking bore water, and is that a
Yep,
good thing?
so no access to the water even for drinking, but also not being close to the waterway, so they're not dropping their excrement, which can then be washed into the, potentially be washed into the river system. So we had to change our watering regime, so we put bore water in. We feel quite proud that we are not contributing to any pollution of the waterways.
Was the creek already fenced when you got there? What did you do?
It was fenced, but in very, very poor repair. So the previous owners took advantage of the river and so let the cattle go in to the waterways. So there was only one dam on the whole property.
Right.
I don't know about how cattle really think about it, but I always think of them in human terms. If I can get fresh running water, well, that's what I'm going to go for, not stuff that's been sitting out there in the baking sun.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what cattle were doing. They were happy enough, and they don't know that they're doing anything wrong, but I felt that it was wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've done a lot of planting there, haven't you, along the creek?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of re-veg planting, and we started that planting in 2017, and to date we've put in about 34,000 plants. And
Are you serious?
34,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah. About every 2 years we try and put, at least 10,000 plants in. And next year's planting is a bit smaller, but it's about 8,000 plants.
How's it looking?
Oh, the visitors that we have to come to Coranderrk, more to learn about Aboriginal culture, not so much what we do on the farm. But I always ask them, how old do you think those trees are? And they'll go, they look at me, they must be about 10 or 15 years old. And I tell them, no, they're only 5. And they can't get over it. It is good fertile land, it is river bottom land, and we've had an amazing success rate on our plantings. And by choosing and by understanding the country and choosing the right areas, not a broad scale area, but we actually did it twofold. One was for conservation, but also to improve our paddocks. So creating wind barriers across the paddocks. So not only do we not allow the cattle access to the river, but we now have improved the land so much through conservation values that we no longer need to bring hay in for the cattle either, ever. In the last 6 years we have not, and we won't, bring in hay from outside.
Not even this year after a really tough autumn and winter.
No, not at all.
Well done.
If we wanted to, we could sell hay. I don't have the equipment to do that, but no, we don't need to do it.
So those trees you planted, they're bringing in the beneficial insects and more bird life?
Yep, so our plant list was chosen, one, by what plants belong there, but also to support the efforts of the state government for the Threatened Species Recovery Program, and in particular the helmeted honeyeater, of which there's only about 35 pair left in Victoria.
Wow, that's the helmeted honeyeater.
Yeah, and our property, with the trees we've now put on there, has been assessed as being the third best property close to where they are currently living in the wild. It is the plan, with partnering with the Victorian government, that it could be a future release site from the captive breeding program at Hillsville Sanctuary, which is only just across the road from us.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now you're growing a lot of bush tucker too, is that right? Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, bush tucker. So a lot of the questions I get talking to the various visitors that come there, what sort of bush foods have you got? And we actually don't have, well, I won't say we don't have any, but if there are any, they're in very, very small numbers. And I started to, as part of my natural resource management, but also having a responsibility at Coranderrk, to look into bush foods, see what I could find out. So yes, everybody knows about eating the kangaroo, the emu, the wallaby. People are beginning to understand that a lot of the native seed was used by us to make flour and various things. But when I started to think about, okay, bread and meat, well, that's not enough to sustain a healthy population of people. So I started to ask about our vegetables, what today we would term potatoes and carrots and parsnips and all that kind of thing. And I found out, well, no one really remembers. Again, a lot of research, a lot of phone calls, a lot of listening. I've found a few varieties which were fairly common, and I'll refer to a lady called Beth Gott, who has unfortunately passed away during COVID, who became my mentored me. She did a lot of work as Australia's first female ethnobotanist,
Right.
which is the study of plants used by Indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
So she had quite a comprehensive record covering New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania. And so using that as a starting point, yes, I do want to establish a bush foods garden. And that is to diversify the land. So we have the cattle on there, but cattle is not cultural to us as Aboriginal people, but it does bring us an income. It's a steady income, but it's not long-term economically sustainable or culturally responsible. So I looked at diversifying what the farm can actually produce. We make a bit of money from a visitor program, we make a bit of money out of the cattle, but if something was to happen to the cattle, something was to happen to the visitor program, like COVID, we wouldn't have an income. So I want to establish over time a commercial bush food farm, so to do our traditional cropping. Because if we think about Aboriginal bush foods, and I think about Australia and its food culture, and we have food cultures that have been brought in from all over the world, and we all celebrate them. Some we like, some we don't. We had the Asians bring in their rice and all their dishes with the gold rush, and then after the Second World War, we had the Italians and the Greeks bringing in pasta and pizza and all those kind of things. And the various migrations that have happened in Australia have all brought their cultures with them. And yet the culture that belongs in this country is unknown, and it's not available. It is just not available. It is available now in some very, very high-end restaurants, but it's not available to the average person, like all the other food cultures that have been brought in here. And to me, losing that food culture is actually destroying our own culture and identity as Aboriginal people.
Can you give me an example of some of the vegetables that you're growing?
So the vegetables I've discovered and that I know I can grow is the murnong, commonly known as the yam daisy. So to us, that was, from the stories I've been able to uncover, was what the potato is to people today, or pasta to the Mediterraneans, or rice is to the Asians. I find it quite bitter myself to eat. But then I discovered that most of our lilies, which are all threatened species and protected under the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act and the EBPC Act, which means you're not allowed to take them out of the wild, were all edible by our people. And these were our traditional farms out here, where we daily went out and collected that for our 3 meals a day.
You sold it to me last night when you described it as just like your grandmother's mashed potato.
Oh, yeah. So one in particular, as I started to experiment, and they are on experimentation, they're not available for sale or anything yet, but the best tasting one I found was the Bolbine lily, which you can actually find quite a lot now that's used in landscaping. Yeah, but the Bolbine lily reminds me of Grandma's best ever mashed potato mixed with lashings of real butter. It's soft, it's creamy, and it's got that buttery taste. But there's, so all of the lily families, pale vanilla lily, chocolate lilies, there are native geraniums and pelargoniums, which all produce tubers or bulbs. And all of them were edible. The other one that was edible was, and I'm not growing any, is our native orchids.
Really?
Yeah, we have native orchid lovers in Australia, not necessarily Aboriginal people. And you talk about harvesting them for eating, and they jump up and down. The orchidists are very, very, very protective of what is left, because they are the most threatened species we have in the flowering plant family in Australia, right across Australia. But the lilies are still they're less threatened.
And without you doing this and creating awareness around this, is there a risk of some of these plants disappearing?
Disappearing, absolutely. Or being, as I said with the Bolbine lily, being hybridized as a landscape planting without actually, that's its value. We can sell it to put in someone's garden. We have organisations, and I won't mention them on here, who are selling a native plant as a grass seed, but to us it's actually our native rice, but they're selling it as lawn seed. They don't realise the actual value of it.
Yeah, and you've got quite a passion for pest management, haven't you?
You cannot have a native environment when you've got so many introduced species through the colonisation of Australia.
And that's plants and animals. We talked about blackberries. You're quite heavily involved with the Victorian Rabbit Action Network too, in controlling the rabbits.
As I become aware of pests and look at ways to control them, because, put it this way, my ancestors never had to deal with those pests, so there's nothing to record how you dealt with pests. And on the farm, our biggest threat is deer. Our second threat is rabbits. And then we have the various pasture weeds that have encroached into our conservation areas. So to learn about rabbits, I had to go out to west of Melbourne, around the Sunbury area, where we also have a little bit of land that's been given back to us by the government, and some archaeological sites, which became my responsibility as our bush crew manager. And so meeting the people out there and looking at the rabbit destruction, and then finding out how they were dealing with it, and has now led me to become a member of the Victorian Rabbit Action Network. So learning about all the methodologies about how to deal with those.
And you've recently done a VRAN mentor masterclass.
Yeah.
And are now a mentor.
I'm now a mentor, but I'd already been identified as a mentor, but the masterclass was, I'll say, a pivotal moment, because it's not important to me, but it's important when I'm promoting work about rabbits or pests, whether they be animals or plants, that I now have a certificate that shows that I'm recognised as being a knowledge holder and has the experience and capacity to help other landholders deal with their rabbit problem.
Can you tell me about some of your other farming practices? No chemicals or little?
Minimal. Unfortunately, you cannot get away from chemicals. But I'm very fortunate, because of the significance of Coranderrk and what we're trying to do, that we have quite a large volunteer base. We meet together once a month, and they are also definitely against chemicals, and so they prefer to hand weed, and you need a lot of people to do that. So when I'm doing a land management plan, I go out there and reserve something. How can I get rid of this? I'll always look for the alternative methods first, and if that's a sustainable methodology, then we will use that.
And that's your way to respect country, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Tell me about some of your volunteers. They're there for other reasons, not just for the work. They're there for, I guess, feeling better.
So the question should be, how did our volunteer group start? So the initial 20,000 plants that we put in required volunteers, and volunteers, we know Australia wouldn't be looked after too well if we didn't have volunteers to put regenerative plants in. So we put those first 20,000 people in over 6 events, of which we had roughly 300 people turn up. Some of them came to all 6 events, some only came to one. But at the end of the planting, those regular ones, which was around 30 of them, said, "Oh, when's your next planting? Like the next year, the year after or whatever." And they said, "Because we'd like to help." So while they were planting, I was actually telling them the story and the history of Coranderrk and what the ultimate goal was, so the values that would be added to the land, not necessarily for economical reasons, but for cultural reasons. And they became fascinated with the story. And so they said, "Is there anything else we can do? Because we'd like to come out and help aside from this thing." Basically, in between the major plantings that we do every couple of years, they will do anything that they could be digging holes, replacing fencing, and recently passing on my knowledge of treating rabbits, showing them how to do rabbit-proof fencing. It could be shifting a pile of old timber, lifting up tin that's lying on the ground, teach them how to work with the snakes that are potentially under there. Teaching them my skills. Woody weed management. Most of them do not like or do not have the skills or the confidence to use things like brush cutters or chainsaws. So I have a secondary volunteer group where people have that experience to come and do that. And so with the combination of all that, I don't have to use a lot of chemical at all.
Another skill set of yours is cultural burning. And you mentioned last night about mosaic burning. I don't quite understand that.
Cultural burning, Now this is a real passion, and it's not just confined to Coranderrk. It's a passion for Aboriginal people right across Australia, because we are saddened by the increase in the intensity of the bushfires that have been occurring, and in my lifetime, going back to 1983, and knowing that that this couldn't have been how this country was managed by our people. The 2009 bushfires, which I was in, 2009 bushes came through Healesville.
And Coranderrk?
They did come onto Coranderrk, and we managed to stop it. And we stopped it with wet towels. We had no other way of fighting the fire, and we did it with wet towels. We were very lucky. It was on the last day of those bushfires, and the weather conditions changed. That was the end of that tragedy. Well, actually, a lot of people ask me, how did your ancestors, how did you guys burn the bush? And I didn't know. I definitely had no knowledge, and my own mob had no knowledge. But I found someone who did have knowledge, and again, he's become a mentor to me, because he's seen my enthusiasm, and I've learnt how to conduct cultural burns for the purpose of caring for country, not for asset protection or fuel reduction, but purely to make country more resilient to fire and promoting biodiversity in the native landscape.
Okay, so that'll bring on new plants.
It'll regenerate the species that are still left there in the ground, if they are left in the ground, which of course then attracts more insects, more birds. I can tell you in the plantings that we've done, and a couple of small burns I've done on Coranderrk, before we put the plantings in 2017, we got BirdLife Australia to do a bird survey of the property, and they identified roughly 30 species of birds across the property. And since we put in that 20,000 trees, so we're now in, so last year they come back and did a survey. We have more than 60 species now on that property.
Oh, winning.
So there's benefits all around for that,
So what does mosaic burning mean?
So the understanding of mosaic burning is, depends on who you're talking to. When you're talking to somebody who's very good at mapping, or somebody who has been taught Aboriginal fire. So mosaic burning is patchwork burning on a small scale from an Aboriginal perspective, a much larger scale from a Western perspective. So if you're looking at a Western burn from the air and they point out where burns have happened over time, you will see that it is still a mosaic burning, but it's on a much larger scale. When Aboriginal people burn, and we call it mosaic burning, it is you have declared an area that requires burning because the health of that area has declined through the lack of fire, and you want to see a mosaic burn within that area, not define an area as modern people do and say we're going to burn all that, but it'll be mosaic because we put the fire out here. Mosaic burning is understanding a whole range of things. So there's a methodology of assessment, which is different to Western science, that when you are burning through an area, you are obligated not to kill any other species. Plants, yeah, plants as well, but insects, moths, caterpillars, small reptiles, all those kind of things, we are responsible for their health and well-being as well when we're undertaking burns.
So if you're doing them in mosaics, they can move on to a safer area.
So our fire is actually meant to trickle through an area. So if you want to learn about Aboriginal fire, this is what I was told, there are no straight answers for fire. You first need to understand how water moves through the landscape, and you want fire to imitate that. Not how much water you've got to put the fire out.
Yeah.
So to become a fire elder, before you light your fire, you have to know that once you've lit it, where it's going to go out naturally. So no beating the bush, no fire takers or anything like that. That scares the hell out of a lot of people.
It would, and that's where your skill set comes in.
That's the skill set, yeah, of making people feel comfortable with that. But yeah, so basically the fire will move through the landscape, but it might go a little bit faster in one direction. It'll trickle around certain plants because they're a little bit greener, so they don't burn. So when you've exposed some of these insects and lizards and smaller type things that can't fly away or run away from the fire, they still have habitat. So rather than annihilating basically an ecological level in what Western science does, which does recover, but it takes much longer time. So we've got to think that after the fire's gone through, we can walk away and we feel good. But what about the things that were already living in there? Where are they going to go? Basically in Western science, you'll see a whole heap of birds come in and say, hey, great smorgasbord, and clean up everything that's been cooked or does not have any protection from predators because you've burnt everything out down to the ground. So it's leaving stuff behind so that as the fire cools down, they can come out from the little cracks around the little hollows and still have their food, fibre, tool and medicine and shelter to go if they are under threat. That's a very simplistic way of looking at it. There's much more to it than that. To plan a fire, can take, if you've never burnt an area before, yes, it can take up to 2 years of observation before you can do a burn under cultural law.
So this amazing farm you're managing now, what does that mean to you?
It means that I can fulfill my dad's wishes, which is to learn my culture because Australians will be asking. I can now use Coranderrk as a demonstration of best practice land management, both from a Western science or agricultural background, but also from my cultural science, Aboriginal background. How the two can actually work in partnership, and it should not be at the conflict, which most people think that native vegetation and there's no money in native vegetation unless you're foresting it, and therefore it's a threat to modern agricultural interests.
So how important is it to you to pass down this knowledge?
The hard part is passing down the knowledge, finding the right people in my own community to make sure that they continue the work that I have done. And I'm very lucky that my youngest son has adopted his cultural responsibility to actually do that. And he's now a recognised fire elder. He's not yet an elder, but a recognised fire knowledge holder on his own, and works for our local council in natural resource management as a dedicated Indigenous fire officer. First one in Victoria.
Good on him. So how can non-Indigenous people support the Coranderrk and the veggie garden venture that you're taking on?
Well, they already are. As people are hearing about it, so Melbourne University is now engaged and partnering with us. So where we need the technical skills and the laboratory skills, they are providing that, as well as Ag Victoria is doing the same thing. We have applied for DGR status, and there are philanthropists that are willing to invest in this new business enterprise because they're seeing value in it. Yeah, we have a lot of support. A lot of people say, we have a website, and it says when we have a volunteer day, and to current date, we have 176 volunteers. That's too many to handle on one Sunday a month. So basically, we do have that core group of 40 odd that we originally started off with, and but some of them, you don't have to volunteer. We have some people that donate money. There are some people that go and advocate on our behalf to local at various levels of government, and saying, we think this is something that needs to be invested in. When they hear the story of Coranderrk, they say this is something that needs to be preserved. And so people, depending on their skill set, are out there helping Coranderrk in the best way that they can. And without them, we could not actually exist or preserve the library that is Coranderrk, to show how we can walk country together and heal country together.
Such an interesting chat. Fascinating, David. Now, I've got some off-the-wall questions for you. These are short answers. The first one is, what time of the day do you get your best work done?
Morning.
I'm the same.
Always in the morning. There's no point going out there to do work if you know it's going to be super hot in the afternoon and starting at 11 o'clock. Yeah, best time in the morning is when you have the most energy, and you can spend the afternoon, if it is too hot, too wet, too cold, observing what you have done.
What's the most unexpected thing you've found on the farm?
Finding remnant native food plants. Although they're not vegetables, one is the native rice, and the other one was the thermida, which is now quite well known as our fairly common wheat that we made our bread flour from.
Great find. Is there something that comes to mind, or the funniest thing that a tourist or a city person has said or done when visiting the farm?
Yeah. Yeah. Two examples I'll give. One person came in there and observing, because we still have a fair bit of blackberry removal to do, they asked, how did your ancestors deal with the blackberries? And I just had to laugh and said, well, actually they dealt with it very well because they weren't here.
It wasn't.
So it was not a problem.
Yeah.
And there was one, the one about the rabbits. How did your ancestors deal with the rabbits? A lot of people don't realise that these things are introduced because they've grown up knowing blackberry all their life or rabbits all their life. They don't realise that they are only recently introduced.
That's right.
So a lot of work that we do as Aboriginal bush crews or natural resource managers, we can't actually do it the cultural way because you've got to remove all those threats first before you can get back to a proper culturally balanced ecology to actually then do proper cultural land management.
What's the most creative use you've come up with for duct tape on the farm?
For duct tape? Well, before the invention of the cable tie, if you want something to stick together that is almost impossible to remove, and I can give some examples of, rather than me climbing up a ladder, is put an extension on the broom handle. But yeah, two broom handles together with a bit of duct tape around it. And no, you'll never pull that apart once you've used it for a couple of hours.
If your animals on the farm could talk to you, which one do you think would have the funniest personality?
Don't know about funny, probably funny from his perspective, but to me it's more that he's always angry at me, and that's our pet goat.
If you could trade places with any animal on the farm, which one would it be?
Unfortunately, he has now passed away, but it was our pet bull.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've never met a more lovable bull in my life. He was never for breeding or for meat or anything. He was a rescue bull. He was found nearly dying by a previous agister, and he was raised inside the house and hand-fed for years. And he loved getting his photo taken with people, and everybody wanted to pat the bull and the horse, actually, the one horse we have on the property. Yeah, I have great memories of seeing, particularly the kids' schools that come through. of being, of course, naturally afraid of bulls, but finding how such a beautiful, friendly animal that he was.
And if you could tell your 18-year-old self one thing or one bit of advice, what would it be?
Listen to your elders. They are smarter than us. At 18, you think you're indestructible and the old ways don't matter. And I think that the world as a society has forgotten that. We're in this rush to move forward into this next phase, which is a good thing for the human evolution. But there's been a lot of mistakes made in the past, and we should learn from them.
Now, if you could sit down by a fire and have a cold beer with somebody, who would it be?
My dad.
Yeah.
He's no longer here with us now.
Yeah, nice.
But if I can have my kids around me and pass on my knowledge and know that they'll pass it on to their children, that's the next best thing.
Family, beautiful. Is there one most influential person in your life?
No. There's been a whole series of people that have mentored me, that have somehow seen something in me that with the right encouragement could go on to do better things, and they've proven right. They've said, "Oh, I reckon you could do this." And I said, "Oh, no, I don't think I can." And but they've persisted, and there've been many. There have been many. But I know that every time I did gain a new skill because of those mentors, that my dad was so proud to see the ever-changing values and skill sets that I've acquired over my lifetime.
One last question. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?
Victoria. I have no intention of ever leaving Australia. I don't own a passport. My dad always said to me, "Us black fellas, we don't go and visit that mob in Tasmania." And we haven't done that ever since the back road got flooded, which is what we call Bass Strait today. I'm more comfortable on Wurundjeri country. My daughter lives off Wurundjeri country. When I go to visit other mobs, I have this physiological connection. I know instinctively as I cross our traditional borders, there is a change in my body. And I'm not uncomfortable anymore because I know I'm welcomed as I go to the other communities that I visit, and they really appreciate the exchanges that we have. But yeah, it's always good to get back home to Wurundjeri country, and in particular back to Coranderrk, to Healesville.
Well, David, I really feel privileged to have this time with you, mate, and it's such an interesting chat. Thank you so much for your time. You're a man in demand. You're actually waiting to go and receive another certificate or another award, I believe.
Which is still on the choir, but yes, another award. That I mean, there is recognition out there, that's for sure.
Congratulations, mate. Yeah, so thanks again, David, for the chat. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Thank you, Darren.
I'd love it if you could follow us on Facebook. Search Salt of the Earth Farm Stories.
Salt of the Earth Farm Stories is proudly brought to you by Grig Media.